Everyone, and thank you. Yes, it's being recorded. Yes, okay. Thank you, Dorinda, Otari, and Martin for organizing this seminar. So yes, today's seminar I will present my research proposal that is titled From Argentina to Australia, a multi-scale ethnographic study of Argentines residing in Perth. And I would like to start this presentation by explaining what took me to choose this research topic and also introduce a bit myself. So my name is Bernardo. I am from Argentina. I was born in the south of Buenos Aires, and I'm a sociologist interested in migration studies. My academic background embraces a bachelor's honors degree in sociology. And, oh, sorry, I was not, yeah, there we go. Why did I choose my research topic? During my job experience, I had the chance to work in 3 different opportunities with migrants. One was in Mexico, this photo, where I lived and worked 10 months in a community in South Mexico, where I conduct different projects with Mexicans that were returning from the United States. Then back in Buenos Aires, I worked for 1 year for the Max Planck Institute, conducting research with Peruvians and Bolivians. It was all about the resettlement process in some shanty towns in the south of Buenos Aires. And finally, here in Perth, during the last 4 years, I worked in a public school for children with mental health and physical disabilities as a student support coordinator. And one of my responsibilities there was to support families from cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds, migrants, most of them. When meeting these parents, I had the most interesting, to not say traumatic stories I ever heard, and all of them had to do with the same and main aspects of the research project that I'm presenting today: home, social and care support networks, and always their permanent or temporary visas. So it was back in July 2019 that I decided to start my PhD project. So far, my research proposal and ethic application has been submitted and approved. I have completed some units that help me to design my research project, and I'm in the process of writing the methodology section and a publication plan, as my thesis will be submitted as a series of papers. My supervisors are Dr. Gretchen Stolte and Associate Professor Farida Fosdar. So what I will be covering today: my research project, background summary, thesis questions, aim of the study, conceptual framework, and then in regards to the research design, the site and sample, methods, and anticipated outcome or expected outcomes, ethics, and then we'll have 10 minutes for Q&As. So I would like to tell you a little bit about the background between Argentina and Australia before presenting the thesis question, conceptual framework, and aims. So Argentina is a country with a long history of migration. Between 1830 and 1975, Argentina received 8.2 million European immigrants, with the US being the only country that received more people in the world. During this same period, Australia was, together with Argentina, Canada, US, and New Zealand, a main receptor of migrants. While Australia continued increasing the number of immigrants after 1975, Argentina suddenly became a country of net immigration to the rest of the world. So there are 2 main waves of Argentines coming to Australia. The first one was between 1970 and 1989. They were coming as refugees as part of a special humanitarian program or family reunion program. They were escaping from Argentina because it was the beginning of a coup d'etat that started in 1975, a right-wing dictatorship. And it was the same period where Argentina had the Malvinas War, also known as Falklands War. It was then that we had what it was called the process of national organization, a reactionary political and economic shift to a neoliberal model. And after that, we had the second wave, mainly economic migrants moving to Australia under temporary and permanent visas. Here in this slide, I'm showing you a graph that is part of the only publication available on Argentine migrants in Australia that was published by migration scholars from the ANU, Australian National Centre for Latin American Studies, and funded by the Council on Australia-Latin American Relations. This is just a 1-page profile showing a quantitative analysis of the Argentinian population in Australia, and the data was collected from the Australian census. Despite the growing size of Latin American migrants in Australia, where knowledge about this collection of migrant groups is still very limited. During the last decade, there was a marked increase on publications on Latin American migration to Australia. And the University of Sydney, Melbourne, ANU, Trove University actually created institutes or departments of Latin American studies. Well, there is some research available on the Chilean, Colombian, and Brazilian communities. Most of the existing research is mainly focused on the quantitative data available in the Australian census. And more important, this new research on Latin American studies tends to homogenize Latin American migrants in research. Perhaps partly because in diaspora, this idea of Latino has become like a national identity for many. However, the economic, political, and cultural difference that exists between the 21 countries that are part of Latin America demand further analysis. While the existing Latin American migrant studies evidence the importance of focusing on this under research area, there remains little work on Argentine migration to Australia. In this research project, I aim to fill this gap by exploring some aspects of this migration process. So being this presented, let's move to the actual project. Okay, let me see, this should work. All right, so my research project is specifically concerned with understanding the social transformations that take place in the everyday life of Argentines residing in Australia. In particular, I seek to understand how this transformation is reflected in the home building practices and social networks of Argentines living on temporary or permanent visas. As part of the thesis question, my main thesis question is what are the social transformations that occur in the everyday life of migrants that move from Australia to Argentina? On a more specific level, I aim to respond, how can we describe the home building practices that Argentines put in place when moving to Perth, Australia? How do Argentines develop real and virtual social networks during life experience of change? And how are the temporary and permanent migration schemes intersecting with the home building practices and the social and care support networks of Argentines residing in Perth? The aims of my project, at a micro level, I explore home building practices focusing on the feeling of familiarity, community, possibility, and security. At a meso level, I explore social and care support networks together with any community formation process. At a more macro level, I explore how these home building practices and social networks are transformed through the temporariness and permanency of a visa status. So the title of my research project suggests that I will implement a multi-scale approach. So what's the meaning of this multi-scale approach? It's basically an empirical frame to examine a specific migration process. The use of multi-scalar approaches by contemporary scholars of migration has become a popular methodological lens to explore the everyday life of migrants. This effort to focus on the everyday life of migrants using multiple scales is a response to a dominant conceptualization of migration processes as a snapshot, as like a fixed snapshot, as a one-way journey. In this research project, I adopt this methodological lens. The micro, meso, and macro scales are only analytical tools that establish the frame of the methodological approach that I use when planning fieldwork, organizing data, writing, and as a broad shelf that will contain the insight of these studies. This is a bit dense, but it's important. It's the conceptual framework of my research project, and is a key aspect for the data collection process and some methods that I will present later. So first we have the notion of social transformation that Castles define as a shift in social relationships so profound that affects virtually all forms of social interaction and all individuals and communities simultaneously. Then we have the notion of home building practices that is defined by H as the building of the feeling of being at home. And he operationalized this concept using the feeling of security, familiarity, community, and sense of belonging. Adopting this definition, Boccagni implements a matrix with clear indicators that will guide my fieldwork. In this matrix, he focused on the views, settings, and practices, as well as domesticity, materiality, spatiality, and temporality. I will go through this a bit later. In regards to the social and care support networks, I adopt Castle's definition of social networks as a place of strength to provide refuge, solace, certainty, and protection. And to operationalize care support networks, I use Finch 5 indicators of emotional and moral, practical, financial, personal, and accommodation support. And finally, we have this idea of being temporary and being permanent. As a cross-border study, my research project brings various temporal and spatial dimensions to the fore. Today, I don't have enough time to go through this in-between process, the transnational perspective of my project. But here in particular, with this idea of being temporary and permanent migrant, I aim to explore how, as a disciplinary practice of the state, the state structures the home building practices and the social networks of migrants. To do this, I focus on temporary visas, studying and training visas, and work and skill visas, and of course, permanent visas. So having this defined, let's move to the fun part, my research design. So in regards to the site and sample, I was asked many times why I'm not running my research in Melbourne or in Sydney or in other sites. In this research project, Perth metropolitan area is the site selected to conduct fieldwork. The rationale behind the decision to do it in Perth is practicity. One of the main objectives when conducting ethnographic research is to gain the trust of the participants, spend time and labor in order to become familiar with the site, to get involved in an intimate way. This could not be possible in a multi-sided format. If we take into account the actual context of COVID-19, the scenario to conduct multi-site ethnographic research would be even worse. In addition to this, conducting multi-site ethnography in Australia during a long period of time, apart from not being economically feasible for a PhD student, as H highlights, it can become unhealthy when you have to mix intensive traveling for a lengthy period of time with family responsibilities. In regards to the sample, I will use a non-probabilistic sample, so the number of interviews cannot be planned in a detailed manner before primary data collection. The number of the sample will be mainly based on saturation. To start, I will interview 40 Argentinos. However, this estimated number could decrease or increase. So how does this translate into an applicable set of research methods? I will be using interviews, participant observation, sociograms, photography, desktop research, and home visits. The first question that I want to answer is how can we describe the home building practice that Argentines put in place when moving to Perth, Australia? To do this, I will use interviews, participant observation, photography, home visit, and home tours. I will be focusing, as I mentioned before, in the feeling of security, familiarity, community, and possibility. And I will be mapping all across Perth the home building practices of Argentines. To do this, I will use a matrix with clear indicators that are linked to these 4 feelings that I mentioned before. This matrix, I know it's a bit dense, but I want to focus on the left side. We have feelings, practice, and settings. On the top, we have domesticity, materiality, spatiality, and temporality. And dense, this is the dense part, we have all the indicators. I won't have time to go through all of them, but if anyone has any question about them, I'm happy to go. This will guide my questions, of course, but I want to highlight the importance of this matrix is the dimension that Boccagni brings in regards to spatiality and temporality, because as a cross-border study, this will give me very rich data in regards to the changes across time and space. The other question that I want to well, before that, let me give you some details about participant observation. We'll attend to some gastronomic events, fiestas culturales, eventos tradicionales, like traditional ceremonies, local organizations. One of my supervisors was suggesting that I should dance some tango or at least attend to the Perth Tango Club and observe their practices, and I will do that, definitely. And I will run some interviews, in-depth interviews, live stories interviews, informal conversations. And at the moment, there are a lot of migrants writing on Facebook pages about their difficulties through COVID-19. I will definitely use this time to try to contact some of these Argentines residing in Perth to try to interview them and learn more about their experiences and about their home building practice and social networks. I will do home visits, and I will use photography as a way to document the sense of some symbolic and material home building practices. The second question is, how do Argentines develop real and virtual social networks during this live experience of change? How do practices of caregiving evolve as part of this migration process? Again, I will use 5 different types of support: emotional and moral, practical, financial, personal, and accommodation. I will be running interviews as part of this, and I will use sociograms as well. Sociograms are a research method using a social network analysis. It's an interactive tool to stimulate discussion and generate rich narrative and visual data. Participants will name people who are important to them and place them on the border of the map. This will provide information about their social and care support networks. Finally, I will explore if as part of their networks, there are institutional organizations that support them. Together with this, I plan to create a database with institutional organizations to then cross this information to have a deeper understanding of their networks and any community formation process. I will use desktop research for this. I will be revisiting participants to time track changes and see variation through time. And this takes me to the last question, how a temporary and permanent migration scheme intersecting with the home building practices and social and care support networks. As part of the same interviews that I will be running for participants, the only difference here is that I will time track these changes. From the 40 Argentinians that I will be interviewing, I will try to have around 20 participants on temporary visas and 20 participants on permanent visas. So a migration track can be circular, can stop and restart at different life stages, and can encompass dynamic senses of beginning and endings, disruptions, withdrawals, accelerations, and decelerations. The term itself to resonate less with linearity and forward trajectory and more with the possibility of what Robertson defined as a stagger or circuitous journeys. I would like to finish this slide with an example. Australia now allows the entrance of thousands of Argentines on temporary student, graduate, and working holiday visas. They find a place to live, a home, they create a new social and care networks. These migrants reside here, in some cases for several years. Some of them end in permanent settlement, others return to their country or migrate to a third country. However, the immigration system, and very important, especially now with COVID-19, the social policy frameworks, position this group of migrants as tourists or transient consumers. As a result, they remain unknown, unrecognized. This ethnographic work aims to explore and unpack those realities. In regards to the outcomes of this project, firstly, this research project will contribute with transcript from interviews, observation notes, visual data, and documents that will be used for a more precise understanding of the Argentine migration to Australia. Secondly, another outcome will be a digital project that will be presenting in public at the UWA library together with a photograph exhibition and a panel that will bring together some of the participants to talk about their own experience in regards to the home building practices and social and care support networks. And finally, an expected outcome of this research project is a base evidence description of the intersection between neoliberal immigration policies developed by Western countries and the everyday strategies of migrants to find a home and maintain or recreate their social and care support networks. In regard to the ethics, the National Statement on Ethical Conduct in Human Research does not consider migrants as a vulnerable group and does not include any special consideration or specific issue. The only thing that I had to develop a bit when I submitted my ethic application was internal confidentiality. If anyone wants to know a bit more about this, I'm happy to discuss it in the next 10 minutes. So that was all. I had to cover a lot of information. Thank you very much. I hope it was clear.
Thank you, Bernardo. Such an interesting presentations. That reminds me a lot about my research. I think we will have a good conversations after this. So now we open the next 10 minutes for